Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bastian Giegerich. I'm the Director for Defense and Military Analysis at the IISS, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar on the subject of assessing the Iran nuclear deal. I'd like to, before we begin, I'd like to say if there are any technical issues along the way, or indeed if you'd like to ask a question, please do use the chat function that is available to you. The Iran nuclear deal, the tentative accord reached between Iran and the six powers on April 2, will of course not end concerns that have built up over the past 3 decades about Iran's nuclear tensions. The deadline is of course looming, the June 30 deadline for signing a comprehensive agreement, and it is in danger of unraveling. If it holds, the deal could be President Obama's greatest foreign policy achievement, or as some probably like to think, his greatest folly. And to help us think through this Iran nuclear deal, we have here with us Mark Fitzpatrick, who is the director of the IISS Non-Proliferation and Disarmament program, and he will assess the political and strategic ramifications of the tentative deal, as well as the technical and diplomatic issues involved. Mark has been a prolific writer on these subjects here at the Institute. He has authored a book called The Iranian Nuclear Crisis, Avoiding Worst Case Outcomes. He has edited 2 important dossiers, one on Iran's nuclear, chemical and biological capabilities, and one on Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. Before Mark joined the IISS, he spent 26 years, a very distinguished career at the US Department of State, where for the previous 10 years before joining the IISS, he focused on non-proliferation issues. So I think it's safe to say that Mark is uniquely placed to assess this deal. And I will now hand over to Mark, who will speak for roughly 20 minutes on this subject. Mark, please, over to you.
Thank you, Bastian. So I've been following the Iran nuclear issue intently for about 20 years. And almost every year it seemed to get worse, and I got more depressed. And every time I talked about it, anybody who heard me would walk out of the room more depressed than when they came in. I'm not so pessimistic today. I'm optimistic that there will be a deal and that it will be beneficial to all parties. The framework that was announced on the 2nd of April was more detailed than I had expected. The hardest compromises were made in order to announce that framework. It's far from ideal, but it meets the goals of the Western parties, in particular, the side that I know the best. That is, Iran accepted compromises that will block all four potential paths to a nuclear weapon. It accepted limits to its enrichment program that would make it impossible during the course of the agreement to use the Natanz facility, which will be the only facility where enrichment will be taking place, make it impossible for that facility to produce highly enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon in less than 12 months. The other enrichment facility now in use at Thirdorder will not be closed down, but there will be no enrichment taking place there during the course of the deal. It will be, in effect, an expensive showcase used for some nuclear research and development. The potential for a plutonium path to nuclear weapons by using the Iraq research reactor has been forestalled because the Iraq reactor core will be removed and replaced with in a way that will mean that Iraq will not be producing weapons-grade plutonium. And then the most problematic way that Iran could potentially seek nuclear weapons by clandestine means is largely blocked by Iran having accepted the most intrusive IAEA monitoring regime more intrusive than applied anywhere else in the world today. Iran will be accepting the additional protocol and additional verification to include monitoring of its mines, its milling, its centrifuge production, the procurement supply chain for nuclear-related materials. So that will preclude the potential for sneak out. Now, it would have been better, of course, from the Western perspective, to close everything down, to shut down Thirdorder, to shut down Natanz. But that was not something that Iran would ever have accepted, and insisting upon that would have meant no deal. Iran wanted to keep those facilities open for two reasons. One was to preserve an option for the future in case the West reneged on their side of the deal, but also to preserve dignity. Iran had insisted that it couldn't dismantle things that it had spent energy building, and preserving dignity is a concept that is not always in every negotiation. Recognizing the need for Iran to preserve dignity, I think, was the key to success in this negotiation. The deal could still fall apart, but both sides do preserve leverage to ensure compliance once a deal is done. On Iran's side, they have more centrifuges in place than are needed for civilian needs. They're reducing from 19,000 to about 6,000, only 5,300 of which would be enriching uranium. That's more than they need for civilian needs, but it gives them a basis for building back up again in case the deal breaks down. And for the West, they retain leverage because the architecture of sanctions remains largely in place. The US, the European Union can immediately reapply sanctions in the event that Iran violates the agreement. US officials say that UN sanction measures will also have a so-called snapback provision. I'm not sure how that's going to work because Russia has said that it won't allow for any automatic reapplication of sanctions. We'll have to wait and see how the final deal looks to see if there really is a snapback of UN sanctions. But to my mind, the most important sanctions are the US and EU sanctions, which have been the ones that have really hurt the Iranian economy. To characterize the deal in two words, you can say it buys time. That's both the biggest characteristic of the deal and its biggest flaw. It buys time by postponing Iran's ambition to have an industrial-scale enrichment facility. Last summer, the supreme leader insisted that Iran would need what he called 190,000 separative work units, which is a jargon term, which effectively means that Iran would need 50,000 first-generation centrifuges, completion of the Natanz underground facility. And they would need that, he said, well, Iran said, in order to replace Russia's supply of fuel for the shear reactor. Well, they postponed that for 18 years, which is a pretty good period of time. We don't know exactly how long the limits of the program are, but Iran would not be able to immediately ramp up once the limits are over. It would take a couple of years, so that's why I say about 18 years. But the sunset clause, this end to the limits, is the biggest problem with the deal, because Iran would be able to build up or have as large of an enrichment program as they want after that, which would shrink the so-called breakout period significantly. It would have, of course, been better to have limits lasting forever, but that wasn't going to be possible. And from Iran's point of view, accepting a waiting period of 15, 18 years it's not so long in light of their 5,000-year history as a people. One answer to this complaint about the limits coming off in 15 years is that we should be so lucky if the deal actually lasts for 15 years. There's a lot that could go wrong with it in between. And if it does last for 15 years, and I hope it will, by that time there will have been a demonstration of trustworthiness on both sides. And the IAEA will be able during that period to draw the broader conclusion under the additional protocol that all nuclear activities in the country are for peaceful purposes. The deal isn't complete yet. It's got another 6 weeks or so of negotiation left. I believe there's an 85% probability that there will be a comprehensive agreement this summer. Maybe not by June 30th. Probably they'll go over the deadline again as they did in March. So let's say July. But there are 3 sets of potential spoilers that could make a deal impossible. One would be if the Iranians overplay their negotiating hand. If they think that Obama needs this deal more than Rouhani does, they will press for conditions that would not be acceptable to the West. I think they would be wrong to think that Obama needs the deal more than they do. Yes, Obama would like it for his legacy, but in terms of U.S. national interest or the demands of the population, few people wake up in the morning in America thinking that I really hope we get this deal. But in Iran, there is a very high expectation of a deal. People really want the sanctions lifted. So I think Rouhani has a stronger political and economic reason to get a deal. But they might overplay their hand, and that would be unfortunate. When you hear the Supreme Leader saying things like inspectors will never be allowed onto military bases, that would be overplaying their hand if they insist on that, because that would not be an acceptable condition for the West. The second set of actors who could spoil a deal would be Iranian hardliners who oppose the deal, taking actions that would create adverse environment. In Iran, the hardliners are not allowed to criticize the deal directly because the Supreme Leader has said we have to support our negotiators. But hardliners can indirectly try to kill it by taking action in other areas. Action like arresting an American reporter, as they already have done, and then sentencing him, charging him with espionage, as they have done, or seizing cargo ships in the Gulf, as they have done recently with the Maersk Tigris, and they tried to seize 2 other ships. The third set of actors who could try to prevent a deal would be hardliners in Israel or the United States who could kill the deal either intentionally or unintentionally. Unintentionally by trying to improve the deal. But the improvements that they might have in mind, and many members of the U.S. Congress have suggested improvements and indeed introduced legislation requiring improvements, would probably scuttle diplomacy because they would add conditions that are unacceptable to Iran. So far, President Obama has won the battles with Congress, the efforts to impose unacceptable conditions to the deal. The Corker bill, proposed by a moderate Republican senator, came out okay. It provides for a congressional role in overseeing the agreement, and that's something that most members of Congress wanted. They wanted to have some say. And it allows them 30 to 60 days to review the deal before any sanctions can be lifted or suspended. But it would require an extraordinary 2/3 vote of both houses of the U.S. Congress to kill the deal. And the votes are not there for a 2/3 majority to kill the deal. 151 members of the House of Representatives have already signed a letter supporting diplomacy. That's more than 1/3 of the House. And I think in the Senate as well, more than 1/3 will continue to support Obama. There are a few remaining issues in the next 6 weeks that have to be ironed out. Sanctions, relief, timing, what to do about the past accusations of nuclear weapons-related activity, and then assuring that the inspectors would have access to military bases to conduct inspections if there were reasonable grounds to suspect violations there. The On April 9th, when the Supreme Leader gave a speech insisting that sanctions would have to be removed on day one of the deal, I thought, oh, there he goes again, setting red lines that are unacceptable. But the Iranian negotiators are pretty good with creative interpretation of the Supreme Leader's words. And they've apparently interpreted it to mean that day one doesn't fall on the 1st of July, but rather after a period of preparation, what they call a zero phrase, zero before day one. And during that preparation stage, Iran would carry out the activities required of removing 13,000 centrifuges, blending down the large stockpile of low enriched uranium, and other steps that are required. Now, Foreign Minister Zarif suggested that this could take 4 to 8 weeks. I think that's far too short of a time. Probably will take 6 months, as the Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz, suggested. So, and this 6 months would not start until after the congressional review period. So, I think we're looking at the deal coming into play next March. It would be a New Year's, a Nowruz present for the Iranian people. The other issues about the dealing with the allegations of nuclear activity of a possible military dimension, PMD. I don't think that the IAEA will ever get full answers to this, because full answers would probably require Iran admitting to weapons development work that would be in violation of the Supreme Leader's fatwa, and that would just not be possible for Iran to do. But Iran, I think, can provide the access to the people and the places that the IAEA needs to see to be able to pursue the allegations. And that, even though they won't get final answers, having access to the people and places is the way to overcome this impediment. And then finally, getting access to military bases. The deputy head of the Iranian negotiating team, Arakchi, had suggested that managed access may be okay, that the IAEA wouldn't be allowed indiscriminate access to military bases, but some kind of managed access. And in fact, the IAEA has already visited Iranian military bases at least 12 times. So I think the Iranian negotiators could make a case back home that they're not giving anything new. They're confirming past practice. And then accepting the IAEA additional protocol has a way of providing for managed access to military bases. The deal is criticized by various parties on various grounds. One of them is, let me deal with a couple of those criticisms. One of them is that this is just the same as the U.S. deal with North Korea in 1994. There was the agreed framework stopped North Korea's nuclear weapons development program, but 12 years later, North Korea tested a nuclear weapon. So 12 years is less than the terms of the limits that we talked about for the Iran deal. So I read in a commentary recently that somebody saying, if Iran is like North Korea, they will cheat. Well, I suspect that Iran may well cheat, but they're certainly not like North Korea. Unlike North Korea, Iran depends on trade internationally. Its people are internationally minded, middle-class consumers. Iran has a fatwa against nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons in its constitution. Plus, there are very different enforcement dynamics. In the case of North Korea, the U.S. ally that in the region that had the greatest concern did not want the United States to employ military action to enforce the deal with North Korea. South Korea absolutely did not want a resumption of the Korean War that would have put their capital, Seoul, in flames because it's so close to the North Korean border, within range of North Korean long-range artillery. But in the case of Iran, it's just the exact opposite dynamic. America's closest partners, most concerned partners in the region, want the United States to take military action in the event of a violation. Israel and Saudi Arabia have made that very clear. There is one lesson from the North Korean case that I think is relevant, and that is that North Korea's testing of nuclear weapons did not prompt a proliferation cascade in Northeast Asia. Didn't cause South Korea and Japan to go nuclear. And one of the strong criticisms of the Iran deal is that it could cause a nuclear domino effect in the Middle East. Now, I'm not saying that the Middle East is anything like Northeast Asia, but it is, I think, instrumental to realize that predictions of nuclear dominoes don't always play out. And in the case of the Middle East, the key question is, although the Saudis insist that they will have the same, they will acquire the same nuclear technology that Iran is allowed, my question is, where will they get it? Saudi Arabia's nuclear industry is rather rudimentary. If they developed enrichment on their own, I think it would take 15 years or more. So they would want to get technology from somebody else. So who would sell it to them? Well, all of the industrialized nations that are members of the nuclear suppliers group follow guidelines that would prohibit the transfer of technologies, sensitive technologies like this that were for proliferation purposes. There are 5 countries outside the NSG that have enrichment: Iran, India, Israel, North Korea, and Pakistan. Well, Iran obviously is not going to provide it to Saudi Arabia, and obviously neither are the Israelis. India, possibly, but India is trying to become a member of the NSG and want to ensure that their export record is clean. North Korea is a likely possibility. They're willing to sell nuclear weapons technology to anybody who would pay for it. But the nations of the world are very focused on ensuring that that doesn't happen. They're watching North Korea closely. And fortunately, North Korea has no ties with Saudi Arabia that they could exploit for this. Pakistan is the usual suspect, and Pakistan has many ties with Saudi Arabia. Pakistan insists that it won't transfer nuclear weapons, and I think they're right. It would not be in Pakistan's strategic interest, because Pakistan's nuclear forces are all pointed toward India. It would dilute their focus. It would weaken them if they were to join in conflict on their western border. The concern I have is Pakistani nuclear scientists who might be lured away. I'm getting close to ending here. I'll just talk for a minute about the impact of the deal. The deal will improve Iran's economy with the infusion of the frozen assets. Iran has about $140 billion of assets frozen, the proceeds from oil sales that it hasn't been able to repatriate. And it will be able to get this back. Now, it won't be able to get it all back immediately because banks will be wary of conducting financial transactions for Iran, lest they get caught up in U.S. Sanctions violations again. But there will be some $30 to $50 billion probably infusion into the Iranian economy, which will stimulate economic activity. It could create inflation, but it'll be a boost. Rouhani will be boosted politically. Trade will resume with Western and other countries, but I don't think there will be long-term investment deals agreed until the implementation of the agreement is in place for a year or 2 years. Investors will be wary about sinking money into a country that may be back on the sanctions block soon. Investors will probably want to wait and see who the next U.S. president is and whether she or he will continue the deal. Although Rouhani would be strengthened by the deal, he probably won't be able to implement the policies in the domestic realm that he has wanted to implement. Human rights, he hasn't been able to free people who have been imprisoned or under house arrest because the hardliners control the security, the judiciary, and other forces in Iran, and they will want to make sure that even though Rouhani gets a foreign policy victory, that he will not expand his reach in other areas. So actually, human rights could get worse, and regional conflicts could also get worse. We saw this already. the Iran nuclear deal was not the reason that Saudi Arabia intervened in Yemen, but it was a contributing factor. And as I mentioned earlier, hardliners in Iran taking aggressive action to try to cause trouble, like seizing cargo ships, that could continue. One reason this could continue is that the Supreme Leader wants sanctions lifted, but he doesn't want rapprochement with the United States. He's very suspicious of the United States. So he will make a deal that allows lifting of sanctions, but he's not going to go further than that and become friendly to the United States. So countries in the region who worry about abandonment by the United States, I think they just have to look at what Khamenei says about the United States to realize that the United States and Iran are not going to become friendly anytime soon. They will, I think, remain in conflict. But to quote my friend George Perkovich, an American researcher, U.S. and Iran will still be in conflict, but now they will be wearing gloves, not bare-knuckled fist fighting. And then I would add to that my own word of when you're wearing gloves, it's hard to pull the trigger of your rifle. So I think military option will be off the table for the foreseeable future. And I'll stop there.
Mark, thank you very much for outlining the issues in front of us with great clarity. Again, I'd like to ask or encourage you in the audience to let us know if you have any questions. Do use the chat function to ask your questions, and we will engage with them as they appear. But Mark, maybe just to kick off the discussion, for which we have a good half-hour time. Assuming we get a deal, and assuming it takes effect as you suggested, maybe in March 2016, that fairly soon after that we will have a new U.S. president. What do you think will happen to the agreement, assuming we get one, once Obama leaves office?
Right. I mean, that's the biggest question that the businessmen, I think, would be interested in, and others who are concerned about the future of the region. So a deal starts implementation in March. The next U.S. president takes office the following January. The deal will have been in place for about 8 to 9 months by then. I don't think that any U.S. president would immediately try to kill the deal if it has been working for 8 to 9 months. Especially the United States will already have relaxed sanctions. Iran will already have gotten some benefits. And the Iranian nuclear program would have been wound down. The 13,000 centrifuges would have been removed. The low-enriched uranium stockpile would have been diluted. The Iraq reactor would have been reconfigured. And Iran would not be able to rush to get nuclear weapons. If any new president killed the deal, number one, Iran would resume its march to having a quick nuclear weapons capability. And two, most of the nations of the world, save maybe two, would blame the United States for this breakdown. Most of the countries of the world would not want to join a new sanctions regime. The European Union, I don't think, would be reapplying sanctions if a new U.S. president unilaterally broke the deal. And countries like China that had reduced oil purchases from Iran would not be interested in going back to lower purchases. So I think a new U.S. president, the advisors would all see the probable impact and would argue against killing the deal, or at least waiting until Iran violated and then letting Iran take the blame. That would be, I think, the way it would play out. In Iran, they'd be smart enough not to violate it under those circumstances.
Mark, thank you. There's a question that came in from the audience which has to do with reassuring Gulf allies, American allies in the Gulf, and potential third order effects. And the assumption is that it might be foreseeable in the context of a nuclear deal that the US at a minimum would increase foreign military sales and conventional technological transfers or technological transfer to allies in the Gulf. So the question is, do you foresee any further destabilizing third order effects that could come from that direction, giving or assuming that this is a likely U.S. response or a likely U.S. measure, and including, of course, Israel's military edge in the region? Do you foresee this playing out?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that I would agree with all the characterizations in the question, but it's a good question. And I think it's already been answered by the promises that the United States did not make to the Gulf Cooperative Council states during the GCC summit at Camp David. Some of the GCC commentators had been talking about wanting a new U.S. security agreement. There was talk about new military sales, but the summit came and went. Reassurances were provided by the United States, but no new defense commitments and no new military sales commitments. And after all, the United States already is providing a tremendous amount of equipment in the form of sales and training and so forth, joint exercises to the Gulf countries. So I think the United States already has that base covered. The United Kingdom and France are also have also in the past couple of years increased their military footprint in the Gulf as a means of reassuring the states there. And that's good. It's good that they have multiple allies, multiple partners to whom they can turn for defense and deterrence. I suspect, and then part of the question was Israel. Yeah, I suspect that Israel will ask for something in exchange for giving in on the Iran deal. Now, giving in, they had no choice but to accept the Iran deal. They pressed as hard as they could to get as tight of conditions as possible. And I think the United States listened to them, but in the end did not to give Netanyahu everything he wanted. And so Netanyahu may ask for more in the way of military hardware. I'm sure that there will be some such assistance forthcoming, although the United States, under the Obama administration, has already given Israel the biggest defense assistance that it ever has received from any U.S. administration. Some commentators have suggested that the United States should provide B-52 bombers to Israel so that Israel could have its own capability to take out the deeply buried, B-52 bombers and the large bunker busters that are in the U.S. Inventory. Bunker busters that would be needed to penetrate the 80 to 90 meters of rock over the Thirdorder facility. The United States is not going to provide large bunker busters and B-52 bombers to Israel. I'm pretty sure. I can't. I know there's talk about this, but my read of it is that's not in the cards.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, let's try to provide some further texture to this regional picture in terms of some of the concerns that you've already touched upon during your presentation. How would you characterize this? Do Israel and the Gulf Arab states share the same concerns, and how far do they overlap, and how far do their concerns differ?
That's a good question, because it's often assumed that that they do share the same concerns, and they both have strong concerns, but they're different kinds of concerns. Israel's main concern is that after the limits on this deal, after 15 years, Iran will go to the races and have a large enrichment program, which would bring it closer to having a weapons capability, which Israel would find very threatening. So Israel's main concern is with the nuclear program and Iran's capabilities getting more advanced. The Gulf states are concerned about the nuclear capability, but for another reason. They're concerned that it would give Iran the a basis for conducting more what they call aggression in the region, more misbehavior. That having a nuclear weapon potential gives Iran a kind of a protection to conduct activity. And they worry that the release of all this money in frozen assets to Iran will give Iran even more wherewithal to misbehave in the region. This came up at the Camp David meeting, this issue about infusion of funds and how Iran would use that money. The U.S. administration's assessment is that Rouhani would use the money for what he promised he would use it for, to revive the economy. There's so much pent-up demand in Iran, so many investments that need to be made, so many repairs that need to be undertaken, that this money is already spoken for in the economic realm. And Obama also said that the activities that Iran has been conducting in the region are low-tech, low-cost activities. They don't need a lot of money to continue to make mischief. Now, I mean, I think the critics are right that money is fungible, and if Iran gets $50 billion more money overnight, some of it would probably be used to offset activities in the region that are destabilizing. But Iran's already been conducting such activities, not as much as is claimed. You know, they didn't instigate the Houthis in Yemen. They're opportunistic. They're taking advantage of the Houthi rebellion. But I wouldn't think the Houthis are proxies. But anyway, the point is Iran is already conducting activities in Syria, certainly propping up the Assad regime, providing training and advice to Assad's forces, getting Hezbollah involved in the Syria conflict. And so money hasn't been the issue for Iran, and having a little bit more money isn't necessarily going to make them worse. But you know, I think if Iran does conduct more aggression in the region, I'm pretty sure the United States and its Western partners are going to make that an issue with Iran. They're not going to break the Iran nuclear deal over such activities, but they're going to respond forcefully, like they did by starting to, you know, when they turned away the Iranian flotilla that was heading for Yemen last month. That was a show of force, and Iran responded appropriately to that show of force by turning around.
Very good points, Mark. Thank you. So far, we've talked about the deal in the terms, you know, that are now in front of us, the current outline that we can see. And you, in your presentation, you spoke or you mentioned that there might be a tendency or there are designs to improve it further. You spoke a little bit about the danger of unintentionally killing it by improving it. But isn't there a case to be made, you know, a logic that would suggest if it was sanctions that brought Iran to the bargaining table, wouldn't additional sanctions now help us to get a better deal than what is currently in front of us?
Yeah, that's an argument that is often posed. Let me address it a couple ways. One is to say that certainly sanctions were very important in bringing Iran to the negotiating table. Removing the yoke of sanctions has been a motivating factor for Iran. But you know, it wasn't the only thing that brought Iran to the table. The election of a different president, Hassan Rouhani, who is a pragmatist. I wouldn't say he's necessarily a moderate, but he's a pragmatic leader. And it was his election that really unlocked the negotiations. Let me say one other point about sanctions. Yes, sanctions were certainly helpful. But I think you could think of it, the medicine analogy comes to mind. You know, some medicine is good for you, improves your health. That doesn't necessarily mean that doubling the dose will make you twice as healthy. It's probably going to make you sick if you don't carefully manage the application of such measures. So in the negotiations, the United States and its European partners maintained the leverage to ramp up sanctions. They didn't have to threaten it. Congress was doing enough of the threatening. And Iran could see that if there was not a deal made that likely there would be more sanctions. So the threat of more sanctions can be helpful, and I think the Congress played a useful role in providing for that threat. But trying to undo the deal now and impose new sanctions measures is not typically the way that you conduct a successful negotiation, by undoing what had been agreed, and not just by the United States, but by its other partners, and insisting on capitulation. As much as I know about Iran, and I'm not the world's best expert, but I do know that Iranians, as a people, don't naturally buckle under to pressure. In fact, most countries don't. Most countries, when they're pressured, I mean, think of World War II when Britain was bombed. They didn't give up. Churchill went on the air and said, "We'll fight on the beaches and on the." So that's, I think, how Iran would respond to more pressure. It's not the answer to getting a better deal.
Thank you, Mark. A question. I mean, I assume quite a number of our of people in the audience have probably followed your writings on this issue, and I've mentioned some of the books and volumes that you've produced here at the IISS. You've also, of course, written frequently in Survival, our journal, about this issue. And there's this question, accepting enrichment in Iran is something that you now seem to have a level of comfort with that you didn't have a couple of years ago. How would you explain that change in your own analysis?
Yeah. No, certainly for years I was arguing against accepting Iranian enrichment, any level of it. And certainly no enrichment would be a much better outcome for an agreement. But that is no longer possible. It might have been possible a few years ago when Iran did not have thousands of centrifuges, but it has 19,000 centrifuges. It's invested too much into this program to give it up entirely. It's become part of Iran's identity. It's infused with nationalistic sense of sovereignty. So I think one has to accept that when facts on the ground change, you have to reassess your position of what's the best way to prevent the situation from getting worse. And that's what we're in. This negotiation is about preventing the situation from getting worse and making it better. It's, as you said in the introduction of this webinar, this deal is not going to end the 30 years of conflict and concern we've all had, many of us have had about the Iranian nuclear program. But it provides a window of managed limits to the program, deep inspections that will continue well beyond the time limits of the deal. And during that time, Iran can show, it has an opportunity to show that its nuclear program really is for the peaceful purposes that it insists upon. So this deal gives us an opportunity to test that proposition. And if it doesn't work, if Iran violates it, if they don't, if they return to experiments and weaponization, sanctions can be reimposed, and the military option can be back on the table. I've argued against a military option today, but I think it's something that has to be in reserve as a deterrent. And I think it can continue to deter Iran from violating the deal and producing a nuclear weapon.
Thank you. Let's pick up another question from the audience, and it again is concerned with some of the wider implications. And the question is on what the Iran deal and the process of negotiation towards the deal might mean for the NPT. Does this set a precedent, a quite extraordinary precedent, one might argue? What do you think?
Yeah, one could argue this both ways. Let me argue it in the positive and to say that this deal strengthens the NPT. It strengthens the NPT in a couple ways. By, number one, reinforcing the verification role of the IAEA. that Iran will be accepting the additional protocol, something it actually accepted a few years ago but never fully ratified and then rejected it. There's only a few countries around the world that haven't accepted the additional protocol. Iran's accepting of the additional protocol gives a boost to this important verification tool of the IAEA. The deal also strengthens the NPT in another way, in that it reinforces the pillar of the NPT that calls for peaceful uses of nuclear energy. This deal accepts that Iran does have a legitimate reasons to pursue nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. It provides the verification to ensure that. So the deal is strengthened. And you know, if there hadn't been a deal, if Iran continued to move toward a quick nuclear weapons breakout capability, that would have undermined the NPT. If Iran had gotten to that stage and actually produced nuclear weapons after all this attention, after all the efforts, the non-proliferation regime would have been shown to have failed. Well, it didn't fail, it succeeded. It stopped what many of us saw as a budding nuclear weapons program before it could get to the point of North Korea and actually producing them. And the fact that Iran will be at least a year away from being able to produce nuclear weapons is a huge boost to the regime. Now, the other side, I'll just give the argument that some would say, well, it undermines the NPT because all these years the United Nations Security Council has mandated that Iran had to suspend enrichment. Iran thumbed its nose at the UN. It thumbed its nose at the IAEA resolutions that required suspension. And now it's being rewarded for this recalcitrant stance by having its program legitimized. And yes, one could make an argument along those lines. I don't think it's as strong of an argument, though, as the one I made, saying that it strengthens the NPT by the verification means. And the NPT, you know, does not outlaw enrichment. It doesn't explicitly acknowledge that enrichment is a part of the inalienable right that nations have to nuclear technology. And the deal does not either talk about a right to enrichment, although implicitly it accepts that Iran has that right. Most countries in the world already think that there's a right to enrichment, so I don't think that the deal undermines the NPT in that regard.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to remind our audience that, you know, now would be about the last time you can get a question in. So please, if there are further questions, do put them to us. I'll have one more that I quickly wanted to ask you, Mark, because we spoke a little bit about, you spoke about Israel, you spoke about Gulf Arab states, we touched upon views in Europe and certainly the US. Do you want to say a few words on China and Russia in this context?
Sure. The words about China will be few because China has been playing a backseat to Russia. Whatever Russia accepts, China goes along with. China is looking forward to this deal so that it can resume robust oil purchases from Iran and deepen its relationship. You know, China has been eyeing Iran as both a market and as a partner. It recently conducted its first ever naval joint exercise in the Gulf with the Iranian Navy. And so China is really looking forward to that. Russia is a more complicated situation. When you look at Russia's national interests, you could conclude that Russia doesn't want a deal that would allow Iran to put oil back on the market, which would reduce the price, and so Russian oil sales would produce less revenue for the state. Russia, which now has a kind of advantage in its relationship with Iran, as it characterizes itself as Iran's only a friend among the major powers. Russia tried to jump the gun by rescinding a ban on the transfer of the S-300 air defense system to Iran, so as a way of showing Iran that it really is its best friend. But if there's a deal, then Iranian consumers would prefer Western products rather than Russian products, and the Russians know that. So you might think that a deal would not be in Russia's favor, but Russia has been honorable in going along with its partners, the P5+1 partners, and keeping the consensus. That's been the most valuable characteristic of the negotiating partners. They've kept a consensus. Iran hasn't been able to divide and conquer. Every once in a while, Russia does something like rescinding the ban on the S-300 that make me think, okay, now Russia is going to do something that would break the deal. But no, they're not doing that. They are upholding a non-proliferation principle.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience, but it will be asked not in the chat function, but via microphone. So please, if we can have that one final question.
Thank you very much indeed for highlighting everything almost. But one question, because I came from the Gulf, and I've been visiting the Gulf frequently. It seems to me, basically, if you want to change perceptions, do you agree that more than military transactions has to be, more than military alliances has to be built with the Gulf, but it's more than this actually, it should be diplomatic, political, and also because there is a perception that Obama's administration is so reluctant to commit itself to actions when there is a need for an action. For example, in the Syrian crisis, they still blame the administration. Many people in the Gulf, actually, I mean, decision makers in the Gulf, blame Obama for being reluctant towards Syria. And of course, Obama tries to amend that by a new campaign and a very important campaign against IS. But still, at the ground in Iraq and Syria, we're still facing a very critical situation. And do you think that by this agreement, my question is like this, by this agreement you are giving, the Americans or the 5+1 giving the Iranians a boost and buttress their own regional position so that they will play as they wish? This is one thing. The other thing relate to what you said on the intrusive inspection, which is quite true, but if you compare it with Iraq, is it anywhere, anytime, or something else is going on, and how do you conduct that? Thank you very much.
Okay, so you posed two questions. The second one I can answer rather easily. The inspections by the IAEA, I don't think should be characterized as anywhere, anytime. Anywhere, yes, they should have the right to go anywhere where they have reasonable grounds for suspicion that Iran is conducting activity, a nuclear activity that it didn't report. But some places cannot be visited anytime. Military bases would require some managed access because, after all countries do have military secrets. And the additional protocol will provide for a way that Iran can ask to go to this base. If Iran refuses it, then the deal will have an arbitration process. And the details of that we don't know yet, but there has to be some access. It just won't be any time. The other question, the first one you raised, is the harder question. And it goes back to what I said earlier about why many of the Gulf states are concerned about this deal, because they fear that it will increase Iran's role, that it gives Iran a boost over them. And that's hard to persuade them otherwise. I think Obama did a very good job of offering reassurances at the Camp David summit, where all the reports that I read of the reactions from the participants there came away happier than when they joined it. They felt like they were listened to. They had the deal explained to them. It wasn't, they had their fears allayed. Didn't overcome all of their fears. And you're right. Reassuring friends, it has to involve more than military sales. And I think Obama hinted at this when he said something, although he probably shouldn't have said it, when he said that the greatest threat to some of the states in the region is not external but internal. And that's a reality. But some of them didn't take that so well because they felt like they were being lectured at. Sometimes when you speak the truth, it's hard to hear. So I think that there are various various ways that Western states and other friends of the Gulf countries can employ to try to give them a sense of confidence that they're not going to be taking a second seat to Iran. That's very important. They cannot feel like Iran is getting all the benefits here and they're being shunned. And they feel like they are right now because Iran seems to be winning on the battlefields of Syria and Lebanon and now Yemen, and that's why military sales can be helpful to reassure them that their national security will be protected. But they have to also play their part, and I think they are. The unity among the Gulf states has recently resulted in gains in Syria against the Assad regime. It was the unity of the Gulf states that helped ensure that there was unity among the rebels in Syria. And so this was not something that the Western nations achieved. It was something that the GCC states themselves achieved, this unity. And I think that's the best example of how you strengthen yourself first before relying on outsiders.
Mark, thank you very, very much for assessing the Iran nuclear deal, for outlining the technical aspects behind it, the motivations, the ways in which it might unravel or might be undone, the dangers that lurk there, for addressing the impact of a deal if it comes off, if it is being implemented, and for dealing with these questions with such great clarity. I think we all appreciate that. I'd like to thank you in the audience for joining us for this webinar. A recording of this session will be available to you through our webpage. So thank you very much for joining us for today's session, and we hope that you will join us on the next occasion as well. Have a good day. Bye bye.